With so many real estate crash videos being uploaded daily by various creators speculating on the future of this wild housing market, the overall feel here on YouTube and among industry experts is clearly bearish. It's fair to say that most people at this point believe housing values are going to fall, but there is one area that gets completely ignored by almost every creator on the platform. We know that real estate can be very siloed, meaning that while the national average can tell you one thing, each city has its own unique market. In some cities, a crash can bring down values by upwards of 50%, while in others, prices barely budge. Each town has its own unique characteristics that either insulate it from crashes or expose it to massive fluctuations in value. The point I'm trying to make is that when we talk about real estate in this country, we typically think only about common coastal cities and boomtowns. Rarely does this place get talked about, the Midwest. While speculation and price growth have almost always been extreme in cities like Phoenix, San Francisco, Seattle, Boston, Vegas, and Nashville, there are millions out there in Detroit, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and Indianapolis who would love to know what is happening to these historically insulated markets. While it's easy to ignore this part of the country, let's not forget that the Midwest is home to over 70 million people, representing nearly 20% of the entire US population. So how bad will the crash be for the Midwest? Well, to investigate that question, we first need to take a step back to the last big crash and look at the Midwest through a lens of comparison, reviewing the national home average and comparing that to the prices in the Rust Belt cities. What we find is concerning and fascinating. Just to give you some perspective, back in the 2008 crash, home values fell 28% from peak to bottom. That was the commonly referenced national average, which takes into account nearly every area of the United States. Now, in this downfall, prices fell for 5 years, bottoming out in February of 2012, and they took nearly 11 years to recover. That means if we pretend that you were the unluckiest homebuyer ever and bought your home in July of 2006, right when prices peaked, you would have not been able to sell your house for the same price until January 2017. Pretty dismal, but for those of you who lived through the 2008 bubble, there is likely a large portion of you that experienced a drop much worse than this. For example, Vegas, which was one of the worst hit cities, saw a 62% decrease in values from August 2006 to March 2012. And if you were the unluckiest Vegas home buyer and bought in 06 at the peak, you wouldn't have been able to sell your home for the same price until June 2021, or nearly 17 years of waiting for your equity to recover. So I say all of this because it's clear that depending on where you live, your value in a crash may be more than 2 times worse than the national average suggests. It's commonly believed that the Midwest falls on the opposite side of this phenomenon. It's almost assumed that due to the fact that many of these cities are home to some of the cheapest housing in America, they are therefore insulated from rapid depreciation at the cost of being slow to keep pace with rapid price growth. That's just another way of saying that housing in the Midwest is perceived to be stable, with prices slow to go up and slow to go down. But that may not be as true as you think, especially given the way we are going today. But before we dig into those details, please take a moment to hit that like and subscribe button if you're enjoying the video thus far. My last upload got an unbelievable 6,000 likes, and I would love to see this one get just 3,000. Now back to the history. If we take a look back to 2008, it was clear that each city, even within the Midwest as a region, behaved very differently. For example, this chart showing Detroit, Cleveland, and Chicago values proves that in 2008, every single location differed despite belonging to the same region. Detroit, as an example, saw a rapid decline in values, falling nearly 48%, while a city with similar characteristics like Cleveland only saw values drop 22%, meaning that the Detroit crash was nearly 2 times worse, although all recovery times were mostly similar. This goes to show that despite the fact that most people would assume Detroit and Cleveland would fall into a similar category, each of these respective real estate markets are relatively uncorrelated. This is because of a number of different factors, including the sheer difficulty of measuring home values in small localized areas. Finding value averages is actually incredibly difficult to do, as real estate is a very unique financial instrument that creates characteristics that are extremely difficult to capture as a single number. What do I mean by this? Well, let me explain using my home city as an example. This is the city of Cleveland. Within the city limits are approximately 168,000 households. Now, if someone asked me the question, what does an average home in Cleveland cost? The answer would be incredibly subjective. For one, most people that are from Cleveland don't actually live within the city limits. This may have something to do with the fact that the school system there has a 1 out of 10 rating and some incredibly high crime rates, and this theme of people living in the suburbs is prevalent throughout the US, and figuring out how far you can drive before you stop counting it as Cleveland is part of the problem. Now, outside of this point, you also have a high degree of variance based on a tiny movement. What do I mean by this? Well, here we have the neighborhood of Glenville. You can buy a home in this part of Cleveland for $20,000, something like this fixer-upper, 4 bedrooms and 1.5 baths. And if you look hard enough, I'm sure you can find an even better deal. It's not exactly the neighborhood you would love to grow up in if given the choice. Now, if we check Redfin, you can see that the median home price for the Glenville neighborhood is supposedly $50,000. Now, staring at this one stat alone can create some rather unclear perceptions regarding home prices. Split Glenville with this street and now you have a completely different outlook. If we treated this northern half as Glenville North and this southern half as Glenville South, you get vastly different results with similar homes. In the north, the median home price would be $66,000. In the southern portion, the median price would be $357,000. That's two different worlds. Prices 6 times higher on average because you move 1 or 2 city blocks to the south. What I'm trying to say with this is that when you begin to zoom in on averages concentrating on cities or even worse neighborhoods, averages begin to mean less and less. What the Case Shiller tries to do is to find the overall trend, and it does a very good job at this, but when we talk about housing crashes, we need to understand that this doesn't mean it will pertain to your specific situation. Remember, home values fell 27% in the '08 crash, but I'm sure for many of you it was much worse than that, and others it was likely less damaging than what the numbers put out. So when we speak about the future of the Midwestern market, we have to understand this fallacy. We can only speak based on trends, and today the trend is not good. Right now, home prices are down 2.3% according to the National Home Shiller, and if we look at Midwestern cities, we can see the same trend as last time. Detroit is down the worst at 1.9%, Cleveland is doing a little better at -1%, and Chicago is down -1.5%. You may hear that and say, well, that's a drop in the bucket compared to the appreciation we've seen over the last 15 years, and these numbers don't really mean anything, but that couldn't be further from the truth. You see, even the most insulated cities cannot fight the trend. Right now, we have massive headwinds in the markets. According to history, there has only been 4 instances since World War II where the Case Shiller fell for 5 months in a row. That was in 1955 when the index dropped only 3.2%, in 1990 when it dropped -1.5%, the big one in 2008, and this one happening right now in 2022. This goes to show you that housing values rarely ever drop, and this kind of price depreciation is cause for worry, especially given that these 5 months are declining at a pace we have never seen before. Even in the '08 crash, which could be argued as the worst in history, the first 5 months of losses left the market down -1.5%. This year, we have exceeded that, showcasing that this crash has technically started worse than '08. And the Midwestern markets are not immune from this overall trend. Of course, given the inventory situation in a lot of these cities, it's perceived that the Midwest will do a lot better than most of these bubble cities like Phoenix, San Francisco, and Seattle. But regardless, they won't be immune from these massive drops if this kind of pace continues. This is especially true if we see the unemployment rate rise. Remember that in the last crash, the unemployment rate only peaked after housing markets bottom, which suggests that if we're going to indeed have a crash, we have a long way to go as the unemployment rate is currently near record lows. In summary, what I attempted to do with this video is to showcase that no matter where you are in the United States, Midwest included, you will not be insulated from the crash if the national average falls in the same way it did in '08. Using the available data we have today, it's looking more and more likely that we see a relatively large housing value decline on the Case Shiller, which means that none of these markets will be protected. Of course, cities like Vegas, Phoenix, Seattle, and many others are likely going to feel the effects of this downturn much worse percentage-wise, but as I stated earlier, Midwestern cities are not immune from large downturns as well, and each one is unique in its own special way, uncorrelated to the rest of the region. As always, thank you guys for watching, and please make sure you hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoyed the video, and drop a comment below if you're buying or investing in real estate in the Midwest.